All right.
And I'm Corey
Hello,
Scott.
and welcome to the ElseNerds Show, a production of Galactic Netcast. I'm Gregor Sprague. For all info on this show, including show notes and subscription links, go to ElseNerds.com.
On
And
ElseNerds,
for
we
other
tend to shoot
Galactic
our mouths off
Netcast
without
programs, go to
thinking, so we will spoil
gncast.com.
things, and we will swear liberally. Not like a liberal. I mean, we'll swear non-politically, swearing a lot.
Yes, exactly. So we have three news stories that we're going to hit at really quick. The first is coming from CBS or from where?
I
Comic Book
like
Resources.
the
And this is Locke Key
misrepresentation
is coming back
of
to the
coming
television.
back to television where it never made it to television in the first place. So what it means is it's finally maybe going to come to television.
Yeah, so basically, for those of you guys who don't know the history, Locke Key was supposed to come out in 2011, but Fox, and it was going to be coming out on Fox, and I believe they had Jesse McCartney. It was either Jesse McCartney or Zac Efron. I want to say it was McCartney though, tagged to be in the show. But Fox ultimately passed, and the hopes were that it might find a home on another network or even become a movie, and nothing materialized with that. Although IDW did screen the unaired pilot at Comic-Con International in 2011. And then for Corey, can you give a really quick history on
Locke Key is
Locke Key
a comic series from IDW created by Joe Hill, who everybody probably knows by this point is the son of Stephen King. It was an original story created for comics specifically, and it centers around Nina Locke and her three children, Tyler, Kinsey, and Bodhi, who, after the murder of Nina's husband, Rendell, returned to Key House, which is a family home in Lovecraft, Massachusetts. There they encounter the manipulative entity Dodge and numerous doors that can transport the mansion's residents to other worlds or bestow them with supernatural abilities. This is a really cool series. I read, I think, the first collection of it, and it was still coming out at the time, and I kind of felt like it would be better to read it all at once. So I put it on a shelf for a while and just haven't made it back to it yet. But it's some great art and a pretty cool overall feel and tone for what the book is. It stood out and got a very big following at a time when I think IDW was still kind of just itself getting a following. So it worked out well for both the creator and the company.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing. I mean, comic books have taken over. And speaking of which, we might be losing our first comic book TV series here, or sorry, our fourth, I think. But we might be losing a big one. And this is the report that CBS is considering dropping Supergirl over budgetary issues. Now, I don't know how much of this, Corey, you know or you've seen happen, but I've heard from multiple sources that it might end up over on.
They've also talked about
CW.
Moving the show's production to Vancouver to save on costs because it's been filmed in the States, and that for some reason is much more expensive. They're not getting the incentives that they would probably get otherwise.
And the big part with this is the fact that CBS television, or CBS, pays $3 million per episode to Warner Brothers just for licensing the Supergirl character, or the Supergirl and all the characters. So that's where I think the CW shift came in, because Warner Brothers co-owns it with CBS. Um, and I've also heard, because where they would get a smaller budget over there, but you look at shows like Flash and Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow, and they've already had bigger effects um
Yeah, Legends of
than
Tomorrow,
what
it seems
Supergirl
like
has
they
shown.
save up each episode for one big scene with the whole group, but that's so many characters that need effects at the same time. Supergirl, it really seemed like some of the effects were okay until they did things like introducing John Jones and seeing him power up and change into what is essentially a fully almost animated character. Uh, yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice to have this on the same network as those other heroes, although we've already established in the crossover episode that it's not the same universe. So if they can't pull the show over, they could at least pull the actress and have her play Power Girl from Earth 2 or Earth 3, since that would essentially be the other version of Kara from another world.
Yeah, couldn't they bring her over by doing a and you could bill it as a big event thing by doing Crisis on
Yes, I
Infinite
mean you
Earths?
could do a storyline with that. The only problem is that
Yeah.
I still feel like we'd be losing Superman. We'd be losing the history that's associated with Kara, and probably losing a lot of her extraneous cast. So we kind of, I don't know if it would do well, because it would always be her trying to make her way back home. Maybe just have her play another version of the character. And since on Earth 2, at least
Yeah.
classically when I was growing up, the Superman there, no, the Superman there was still alive. It was Batman had died. Never mind.
But no, yeah, and then finally the last story that we were going to mention is a clarification for a lot of people, and this is that Paul Feig, the director of the new Ghostbusters, offers a timeline and context for the assholes remark. And then the Daily News, when
Yeah,
it first
so
reported it, is offering a
last week there
correction.
was a story that was popping around everywhere that was Paul Feig says the geek culture is home to some of the biggest assholes I've ever met in my life, which I didn't see a lot of arguments about. I saw a lot of people angry at Paul Feig because he's Paul Feig and because he has the balls to busters, or he gives voice to women in film in general. I guess that's apparently bad to some internet people. And those people are exactly who I would have aimed this at and probably still do. But the problem is that, like so many things on the internet, it was completely false, or at least so false that it may have just been labeled false. What Feig had said was from a interview years ago, and it was completely taken out of context and put into this story, which was about something else entirely. So he basically said, "Hey, it's okay that you guys are all mad at me, I guess, but why are you mad at me about this when this is bullshit?"
Yeah. So I mean, I see his point here, because the nerd community, and it's one of these things that I I struggle with myself, because, and again, I still have this song plugging or going in my head, the double clicks, nothing to prove, where it seems like the girls get the biggest, um like some of the biggest criticisms, as, oh, they're not true nerds. And it's like, these are people who got picked on in high school, made to feel like the outcasts, and now that everyone's coming up to
Yeah,
their
I
door, they're
mean,
just going to be
I don't
dicks.
think. And that's also the assumption that people who label themselves as geeks were the ones who were picked on in high school. And frankly, that's not always the case either. Sometimes it's just the guys who are like, oh, well, I like Ghostbusters proper with penises, or I like superhero movies, and I have to assume that because you don't have dangling genitalia, that you don't like them as much as I do. So I'm going to tell you that you're wrong. That's what it seems like to me, is that there's no excusing on either side. There's no saying, oh, because you've been persecuted, you might feel like you have the right to do this. No, you don't. You never do. And if you haven't been persecuted, well, then you don't have less right. You just still don't have the right to act this way. But everybody does.
My only question for them though is, how did they think that they busted a ghost?
That's what the proton packs are for. It's completely powered by genitalia. I just let's talk about Slimer and that kind of context.
Just one addition. Because it's mainstream anymore, now we have the bullies that like comics and keep on doing what they do, but taking our beloved genre into the mud.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, the more people you have that like something, you have more assholes that are part of it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. You can, and I've probably talked about this before, you can point out political leanings, religious leanings, science leanings, whatever. If you get a group of people together and you all like, oh, we all think a lot alike. And then that one person who comes in, he's like, well, I think a lot alike with you guys too, except for these one or two things where I think very differently. And it's, well, do you oust that person because they think a little differently? Or you just go, well, yeah, you're one of us for the most part, so you stick around. And then some more people come in that don't match you as much, but match that first person a little bit more. And so they're maybe at a 50% for you or an 80% for him. And it starts to kind of balloon out. It's like, well, we want to be inclusive. We want to, because we all kind of matched on this one thing at first, right? But then it gets taken over by people who don't think the same as you. Now, part of that's integration, and part of that is a happiness of like, we are a big melting pot world. We should have different viewpoints. That makes things stronger sometimes. But then you get that group that kind of takes over, and that's when you get things like Gamergate, or you get things like the sick puppies that are taking over voting in books and things like that for the awards to only be towards virile men stories instead of anything that might be inclusive to other genders or other sexual orientations or anything like that. It's like, no, that's not sci-fi. This over here is sci-fi. This is a guy trapped on Mars, which is a cool story, by the way, but not the only cool sci-fi story. So yeah, you let people in because it should be everybody enjoys sci-fi, everybody enjoys comics, or as many people as can. But then you get the groups that just like, well, now that we're here, we really like what you've built here, but we're going to kind of destroy it and make it into our own thing. And if you're not on board, then you're not a geek enough, and you can GTFO.
Yeah, unfortunately. And so that's going to do it for the news. We're going to talk, and so we're going to nerd out here for a little bit. And it's going to start with me with Game of Thrones, because this is what I just got done watching, because work is so fun, especially when you work retail. Sorry, that's like a drinking game now. Just start taking a drink when I complain about work.
I actually was drinking.
You'll be drunk by the end of the show. But so mainly catching you up with all the stuff. Bran is apparently up at the Tree of Life or whatever, the Midgardian, or not Midgardian,
we'll just call
Asgardian, Norse God's tree sort of deal. Yeah, Grootland. Visiting his traveling through time, visiting his dad in all these other places, but more like Ghost of Christmas Past visiting, not Doctor Who, let's go kill Hitler visiting. And Jon Snow, which I highly recommend this past week's episode of SNL for the one skit alone of of Game of Thrones that they did with reviving Jon Snow. So he's alive and all this stuff, and things happen there where at the end he kills the people who killed him, which is it's
circle
weird
of
to wrap
death.
your head around that. But more importantly, there were the circle of death. But there were funny parts in here, and I'm like, wait, this is Game of Thrones. When did this become a comedy? But it was just subtle little moments. One including where the small council is talking about Cersei and her bodyguard Sir Gregor, and I'm not just saying it because his name is Gregor, but he's the Mount, and he comes down, or they're both there, and then camera cuts to one of them, and you just hear,
they did a fart take.
Yeah, they did a fart take, and I'm just like, yup,
and
this is
now,
great.
Because right after that moment, the whole council was like, well, I'm taking my ball and going home. And so they got all up to leave. Now, is it because they were trying to show Cersei the strength of, well, we're not going to work with you? Or was it really that old guy farts stank up the room so bad?
I think they would say it was column
hopefully
A,
he didn't leave a column
really
on the chair, but
B.
What are you going to do? Food stuff was not great in that point in time.
Yeah. But no, this is becoming another great season of Game of Thrones, and so much so to where I'm sitting there going with Bolton,
Reese.
the Bolton bastard. I can't think of his name. Reese. Where they're like, oh, here's the final Stark brother. I'm like, oh damn.
Well, not only that, but as soon as he walked in, they're like, well, how do I know that this is a Stark? I'm like, shit, here comes the direwolf's corpse. And then boom, there's the head of the direwolf, right? So what have the direwolves really done in this show? It was like they show up as puppies at the very beginning, and then a lot of them died a lot. And we've only got a couple left, and one of them disappeared. So
yeah, Ghosts, or no, not Ghosts.
No, Brands, I think, is with
disappeared,
him.
And then
Rickon's just died.
Well, then both of them
are Sansa, hers was killed. Arya sent hers off to keep hers from getting killed, and Jon still has his. They sewed the head of Rob's onto his body. So it's not a good place to be a direwolf.
Yeah. So, Beat, you've been watching Game of Thrones. What do you think?
The first thing you said about going back and not changing everything, he called out for his father, and his father reacted for a moment. So, could we see more going on there?
There is that part to where I do think there is going to be something there that they're going to develop on further. But I still see it more as a to steal a reference from the person on my shirt. It's more of a Superman in the up in his
fortress,
the island, Fortress of Solitude. I couldn't think of the name. God, with the recording of his dad getting advice that way with the records that they had of Krypton, and not so much as he's time traveled into the past and this is going to change the future.
Yeah, but every time Rand gets a little bit closer to exploring these points, he gets pulled back out of it by his mentor. And also he's finding out things about his dad that he believed were one way, and then it turns out they weren't true or were changed in some way. And it's kind of interesting to have Ned Stark coming back as a character again, although not with Sean doing the acting, but to see this aspect of him, because we've talked about his character. Ned has been like, he was our hero in the first season until he wasn't, and that changed the entire context of the show. That was what set us on the path of what Game of Thrones is, which is don't love anybody, because they're gonna die. But now we're seeing who was our first hero on here is suddenly maybe not as heroic as we thought, and we're finding out whatever happened to his sister, and I'm kind of worried as to what really was the situation there.
Yeah. Also the honestly, a lot of the Stark storylines are interesting. Like especially with the Arya Stark storyline, with her continuing with the was it the faceless guy?
The girl with no
Is that
name.
what yeah.
Arya is no more.
Well, yeah. Sorry, the girl with no name. But that part has been interesting me just because it's been a teardown of a character to then build up
which
a new character in a way.
Has been kind of ongoing for her. I mean, she was building slowly anyways, or actually very quickly, from getting kind of trained by the first swordsman and then getting pulled out of the place before her father was killed and her sister was married off to Joffrey, traveling around with the Hound, all of these different things that she's done. But yeah, similarly what we saw happen to Sansa last season, where she got tore down and now she's sort of building back up again too. We're seeing that power fluctuation of they have to go through these horrible things to become stronger, to survive through them. Although Jon, was killed.
But she got the power.
Yeah.
She was looking through the cat when she was in training. This way she was able to beat the master. And we see her brother's power in her again. And I'm intrigued.
Yeah, my wife kind of leaned over to me and said, she's my favorite storyline. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. But again, never pick a favorite. Gonna steer you wrong.
Yeah. It's sort of like in Walking Dead. Oh, they become a moral compass. Oh, the compass broke. So,
yes, sir.
So, Corey, you've seen Batman versus Superman.
Why would I go to a theater to see this? I saw it on the... And so, I finally saw Batman v Superman. And that's our show. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
So, feel free to go as in depth as you want.
Wait. Did you get the check from Disney?
Yeah, that's right. Disney is paying me as a reviewer to give it a shitty review.
Go on, then.
Apparently, they're going to have to backdate that check like Steve's pay for being in the army and underwater for 90 years, because I've been doing this for a while. No, I felt like, because we're going to get the discussion about Captain America Civil War in a few minutes, not even that long. I felt like since I saw that and what I knew of the story of Batman v Superman, I could imagine that there were a good number of similarities in the storylines. And obviously they're going to be compared to each other because the last major superhero movie to come out was Batman v Superman, and how Captain America now performs with that in mind is going to be on a lot of people's thoughts going forward. Which one performed better and why, and is this a Marvel versus DC thing, or is it just a one type of movie versus another type of movie thing? So I felt like, all right, I'll watch it. It was available to me. It was kind of like, I've talked about pizza rolls before. Oh, I woke up and there's a plate full of pizza rolls there. They're disgusting, but I'll eat them. And that's what this was. So I can't say that I didn't go into it without a prejudice already. And as much as I try to convince myself that I was being non-prejudgmental, I obviously am. And I came into it from having seen Man of Steel and not enjoyed Man of Steel. This didn't do anything to change my mind. There was a lot of weird moves in this movie that I didn't think made a lot of sense. People are saying, and maybe rightly, that the extended version that's going to be coming out on Blu-ray soon may make more sense as a story. I can't imagine what they can do to clear up character motivations that didn't make sense from the very beginning. And really it all hinges on hearing that person has the same name or mother's name as yours. That's what's going to be what suddenly wakes you from this I'm going to make you bleed to, oh, wait, I'm sorry, we have so much in common now. Just the moment of Superman going up to Batman and saying, wait, don't attack me as I'm still striding towards you powerfully in the dark. Just, no, but then I'm going to punch you in the face a little bit because you did try to hit me. It's just a lot of mess. And I wanted to like things like they do show a couple of scenes of the Flash character, Aquaman, of Cyborg, but I don't know why. I couldn't get the context of that. I couldn't get the context of Batman dreaming about the future. So much like a problem I have with Bryan Singer over at X-Men, he suddenly gives characters powers that they don't have. It didn't work for me. As I understand, there's a lot of things that have happened in the comics. There are a lot of things that you want to get onto film because they're cool and they look cool. But the comics had context for all those things, and you tried to take 20 to 50 years of storylines and just throw them all on the page. Why the hell does Luthor even think he can bring Zod back to life before he opens up the ship and has the ship teach him? And then he puts his blood onto Zod's body and dumps him in the water, and the ship's like, hey, maybe you don't do this. Maybe you fuck off and die. All right, I'll fuck off and die, and let's do this. Okay, Kryptonian technology that works off of fingerprints? I didn't get the context of any of what was being gone for, but that was what I expected. So I got exactly what I thought I was going to get, and I don't think that's fair for a real review. So I'm grain assaulting this and saying, I knew I was not going to like this. I wound up not liking it. Big fat surprise there. Hey, look, I'm an asshole on the internet, just like Paul Feig said it was.
But here's the difference. Here's where I'm gonna make it to where you're not quite an asshole on the internet. But no, because I'm gonna give you some stats. So starting off opening weekend, comparing the two big movies. So this to Captain America: Civil War, but opening, this is all both on IMDb at their respective movies pages. Opening weekend for Batman versus Superman, it did $166 million. Meanwhile, Captain America did $179.1 million. So it's they're both relatively close. They both had about the same budget, or estimated same budget. But also where I would say, and ask you, since you've seen it, and I think Beat's seen it as well, everyone that I've heard who's a comic book fan has said that they haven't liked the movie. And
I don't know that that's necessarily true. Like Jimmy Palmiotti, who is not only a comic book fan, but is a comic book creator, I believe he enjoyed the movie a lot. And I saw that... Eric Larson from Savage Dragon said, why did you guys tell me that Civil War was such an amazing movie? It was okay, but my expectations were so high because of everybody on the internet. So I think there's room to have differences of opinions on these things. And I don't think that even saying that, well, this one made this much money and this one made this much money, because if it was up to me, the most money earned the Winter Soldier would have been a higher earner than it was. Guardians of the Galaxy would have been a higher earner than what it was. And Guardians of the Galaxy did great. But
Yeah. Well, and I only threw out those facts because a lot of people would go,
and a lot
oh,
of people
well,
would,
who
and
made
I don't even think
more money on
opening weekend matters as much as long term of when you see the drops, when you see, okay, we saw it, and do I want to go out and immediately see it again?
Mm-hmm. But see here, I think you're still missing it, because those are still close numbers. I mean, if it was, you know, uh, Batman versus Superman made 200 made all of its money back. It's estimated did $250 million, and then for opening weekend, and then Civil War did 100 million. Then that's something where I could see that point. But also the other part that I've heard is that there's not really setups to the shot or to the sequences, and it's all like a whole bunch of more like smaller stories that has this overarching theme forced on it, is what I've heard. It was something along those lines. Like it was like these little segments. Like I don't think I've heard anyone talk bad about Wonder Woman.
I don't feel like I know Wonder Woman from this. She did a very cool scene, a couple of scenes. As Diana, she was interesting, but
yeah,
it wasn't a Wonder Woman movie. She was just kind of background to what was going on between Bruce and Clark. Lois was only there to be in danger. The scene of Lois running in, seeing Bruce say, "How do you know that name? And why would you say that name?" She wasn't even there to hear the name, but then just automatically assumes, well, it must have been he was talking about his mom. She picks up the spear with the kryptonite at the end, dumps it into the water, to then 5 minutes later, when a whole bunch of shit has been going on in that 5 minutes, run back into the place to then try to get the spear out of the water. So it was a pointless thing to just put her in danger, to have Superman go and save her and then struggle with the spear himself, which again, Batman's right there. He ain't doing dick against Doomsday. Why don't you send him in there to go get it? It seems like that's his thing. No, it didn't make sense. Now, we'll talk about this in Civil War. What this movie did not have was the context of a half dozen other films to lead into it. So as we're seeing Batman on the screen, one, they're building off the assumptions that everybody kind of knows Batman from the Nolan films that just happened, or because he's fucking Batman. But we don't have a context for Flash or Cyborg or Aquaman or many of these other characters. And so it just sort of happens. We have no context of the Jimmy Olsen that they kill at the beginning for no reason, even though apparently there's another Olsen that works at the Daily Planet that I don't know if she's his sister, his wife, or what, but she never seems to be hammered by the fact that Jimmy Olsen died somewhere in the desert. But we're supposed to buy in that that's who it was, and how cool it is that we use the character. I think that this was a lot of, I just want to do this because it looks neat, and it's straight out of comic books. It's straight out of comic books, except for context and story. And that's, like we've talked about before, I think Snyder's view of comic books is the art and the scenes, but not what the history is, or the camaraderie of the characters, or their personalities, or anything else like that. And I think that's a shitty comic book that I wouldn't want to read.
So
and I don't want to see it on screen.
The other part is that Zack Snyder and the other heads over at DC are trying to cram as much as they possibly can to play catch up to what Marvel's already established.
That may have been part of it, but I honestly believe that Snyder was given carte blanche to make his Batman versus Superman movie after he made Man of Steel. And they were like, yeah, we're going to do this thing. We're going to launch Justice League. So make a movie that has Batman and Superman fight that's going to lead into a Justice League movie. And if you can, throw Wonder Woman in there too. I don't think that anything could have happened other than them cutting him off from things. I don't think anything would have happened that would have kept him from making the movie just the way that he made it. Because this is the kind of movie that he wants to make, which is perfectly okay for him. I just think that someone else above him should have looked at it and said, but is this the best case scenario for these characters as we're trying to introduce them? And they didn't do that. So I think Snyder made the movie he wanted to make, and he stood behind it. He believes in it, and that's perfectly okay for him. I just don't, and it leads me down the path of I'm less and less interested in this DC cinematic universe as it goes along. And the last selling point they're going to be able to get me on is probably going to be Suicide Squad, just because the trailers for it have become more interesting as it's gone along. Yeah. Whereas Batman v Superman, it became less interesting to me as it went along.
And that's where I think I think this will become that Suicide Squad will become the thing, because if it does like how everyone's expecting it to do, and it is really good, I think this almost sends the right message to DC with you can't have someone like Zack Snyder running the show, because like almost do the Kevin Feige approach.
Yep.
You know, where you have someone who's not directing the movies saying, okay, here's where we should go, you know, get a big picture look over everything, as opposed to just do, you know, okay, he's going to focus in on this movie, try to get as much as he can in there, and then fuck the rest of the 5-year plan that they have.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation for Suicide Squad is what people are going to compare it to is going to be a Guardians of the Galaxy or a Deadpool. That's going to be the level that they want it to reach, at least, is the hope that even though it's a huge cast and probably a very expensive cast, they're going to expect that that's where it's going to hit. They're not going to expect it to hit Avengers numbers or Batman v Superman numbers, Civil War numbers. I don't think that that's what they think is going to happen. But it could. I mean, it's very possible that it could. I don't know that that's realistic. But Marvel doesn't expect every film to hit Avengers numbers. I'm sure that they didn't expect Iron Man 3 to hit the numbers that it did, but it did, and now the expectations move up for everything else. But they still allow themselves to do an Ant-Man and know that Ant-Man may not be the success level of these other movies, but then we get to involve Ant-Man in these other movies. And we have the Thor films that don't do incredibly well, but do well enough, and we have Thor to do these other things with. And then the next Thor movie, maybe we up the ante with putting the Hulk in there. So that's what building a bunch of things as your base does. Whereas trying to start with this giant pillar with nothing to hold it up is a little more challenging.
And it's going to give it's going to give attention to some of the great directors that they have doing these movies. Like it started with Jon Favreau, then it moved to Joss Whedon, and now it's the Russos with Civil War, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah, let's just jump into it. It's an easy transition.
And then Taika Waititi, who's going to be doing Thor Ragnarok. You know, it's basically saying here's a spotlight on great directors, sort of deal. So Captain America: Civil War came out this past week. I actually had the honor of going to go see Captain America with someone who had not seen a Marvel movie, a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
How'd that go?
Yeah. It went good. Direct quote, "This is a review from the youth pastor of my church. Better than Star Wars."
Wow. Well, any Star Wars or just the newest Star Wars?
The newest one, because he did the same thing. He hadn't seen, in his words, he goes, the only Star Wars that he saw was the old ones. And I'm like, that is all
you should see, probably. But
I mean, if you want to be a completionist, do 2 and 3, you know, because fuck episode 1. But I'm gonna give myself props on that one. Damn it, I can't give myself props.
I got you.
But so, and then he's like, yeah, it's better than Star Wars. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then he asked questions about certain characters, and this is a warning for audio listeners right now. We are going to spoil the movie. We say at the top of the show, but I feel like we need to say it again, because otherwise hate mail is going to come flooding in, because we get all this mail. and the hate tweets and all that stuff about, oh, you guys spoiled it for me. You've had 2 warnings. But my review is this was pleasantly different, and I cannot wait, because I had the other weird experience of going into a movie theater where everyone was clapping after every trailer.
After the trailers. All right, that's interesting.
So we come in and we're just a little bit. We're catching the end of the Doctor Strange trailer, which it's the one that we've already seen. Where the Ancient One soul punches Stephen Strange. But then after that, woo! I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what the fuck?
These are people who are excited for the Marvel films. They're there to see a Marvel movie.
Oh, no. The next trailer that plays is The Rock and Kevin Hart in Central Intelligence. Trailer plays immediately after.
Woo! All right, somebody was drunk.
The audience was drunk because it was everyone. So much so that my youth pastor was like, this next trailer, should we give it a standing ovation? I'm like, no, don't do it. Because I know he would. They go, no, I will just do this. I will just be like,
it is your youth pastor. I mean, maybe he breaks everybody into hymns.
But no, and so I'm like, in my head, I'm like, they know we're in Jackson, Michigan, right? Not Los Angeles, not New York, not a bigger city where the chances of that C. Robert Cargill or the director of Sinister or The Rock is going to come in and go, thank you for applauding my trailer, now let's enjoy the rest of the movies, or enjoy the movie, sort of deal. But which was all fine, dandy, stuff, whatever. I ignored it. But I was expecting more of an opener, not here you are, just smack, boom, you're going. I'm like, wait, okay, the lights went down, so we must be watching the movie, but where? Oh, okay, we're in it. Cool. Here's Bucky being brainwashed, which was weird. It was brilliantly creepy for me, just with how they did it.
So getting into this, one of the first things that I remember people talking about was, this is just an Avengers movie disguised as a Captain America movie. And one of the things that the Russo brothers said is, no, this is very much Steve's story. It is, but it's also Bucky's story, and it's equally Tony's story. Those 3 characters are really what this film is about. So Bucky's story was started with the Winter Soldier. It was very much about him, but in that he was the antagonist to the heroes. This, he's not exactly a hero, but he's what the heroes are fighting about, and in some cases for. And he is part of the team in a lot of this. So yeah, when you think about superhero movies, classically, when you get the trilogies, they keep introducing more characters as they go along. It's like that was a common complaint of like the Spider-Man movies. The first ones by Sam Raimi is, you got Spider-Man and a villain, and the next one you got Spider-Man and more villains, and then you got even more villains and stuff in the third one, and it just gets to be too much to handle. Batman, same thing. It's like Batman versus one person, then Batman versus 2 people, then Batman versus multiple people. It just gets a little bit overloaded. And I didn't feel like this is overloaded, but again, because a lot of these characters were already introduced and established in other things. Even the newer characters like Vision and Scarlet Witch, we kind of understood them because that was prefaced. But we were introduced to both Black Panther and Spider-Man in this. And while they didn't glaze over who they were, it was a lot to take in.
Yeah, and it was, and it's one of those things that I felt like they handled it perfectly, because they didn't need to get into the origins of these characters, because they have movies coming out next year,
right? Which are not necessarily even origin movies. I'm surprised, because they had said initially that Doctor Strange was not going to be an origin film, but everything we've seen in the trailers has looked like this is the origin of Doctor Strange. That was when they were saying they were backing away from that.
Yeah, which wouldn't surprise me if that's just the opening half
or
hour.
Like the origin of Batman being in essentially the opening credits of Batman v Superman, although that was apparently all his life was about in that movie.
Yeah.
It's still a lot, and many things were kind of glazed over to have effect in this, and relied on you being a fan of the Marvel Universe all the way through. Now, you say you brought somebody who hadn't seen any of these movies. That's what's really uncanny to me, is because I would have felt like I would have been a little taken aback by it had I not been a super fan.
Well, but here's the funny thing. To go back to that, because he drove me there, because it took convincing. And actually, here, if you want to convince someone,
Candy in a van,
say use. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, but when he's driving, that's sort of hard. And actually, there was candy in there too. There was Skittles, but that's besides the point.
Don't tell me my business.
Use the analogy of gun control, because that's what we did. We told him it's basically like gun control, but you think about it, the guns are people that have superpowers. Sorry for hitting the microphone. And so, that's just sort of how things happened. And we tried to talk our senior pastor into going. We almost had him going, but slight little change of plans. I'm like, that'd have been so cool. Just sit there. You got both pastors in, but my youth pastor, he only had questions about the newer characters. He only had questions about Scarlet Witch, Vision, Black Panther.
Like, where did Vision get that cool sweater?
Yeah, sort of deal. And like, he had some questions about the other ones, but it was mainly those guys. And I'd be like, well, they were in the last movie, and I'm sort of planning get him caught up on the Marvel Universe, because the last Marvel movie he saw before this was Ang Lee's Hulk.
Well, that would definitely put you off.
Well, yeah, because this was his direct quote. And I told someone about that, and and they said his thing. They're like, yeah, the Hulk movie where it was a really bad CG version of the Hulk. I'm like, yeah, Ang Lee's Hulk. Because that's how both the people said it.
Did he fight dogs? Did he fight Hulk dogs in it? Because that's the giveaway. Was Nick Nolte there looking like a somewhat less scary version of Nick Nolte? Because that would also be the giveaway. What I want to say about this movie is the things that it covered and the themes that it did, like I expected when I watched Batman v Superman, a lot of similarity. A lot of the people with powers have a responsibility. Someone needs to keep them in check. Well, do you think that you have the authority to tell me how to protect people, how to be a person who is a hero to people? What makes you think that you can make better decisions than I can? And while you have a committee sitting there and arguing whether or not to send me in to save somebody, they could already be dead. And more dangerous things could be happening. And sometimes you might not even choose to send me in at all. And that's probably even worse. Or you send me to do things that I don't think are right. And that's a problem. It's funny because Steve is the one who takes that viewpoint in this, but Steve was a soldier. And soldiers commonly are meant to follow orders. But at the same time, he's an American soldier who believes in the freedoms of what being an American is, and this goes against that.
And I was just So that topic was present.
Well, it was covered in First Avenger.
Yeah, and
well,
that's
because
the thing
with Scrawny Steve jumping on the grenade.
And all of these things are points of, we've established who these characters are, and that's how we got here. Thunderbolt Ross, we have an understanding because we saw him in the Incredible Hulk movie. We get his motivations. Tony's motivations in this are based around the fear that he's already had. He has post-traumatic stress syndrome that he dealt with after the first Avengers movie that is the basis of Iron Man 3. And then we find out that going back on his word to Pepper has messed up his relationship with her because of what he did in the second Avengers movies in Age of Ultron. Plus, he was totally irresponsible in Age of Ultron And while the Scarlet Witch messed with his head a little bit, he allowed terrible things to happen by thinking that he knew the best. So his idea of maybe somebody else should be making these decisions for me instead of me, because he can no longer feel like he can shoulder that kind of responsibility and doesn't want to. He's feeling old. He's feeling alone. He's feeling homesick for his parents who, died when he was very young. All of that makes sense as to his characterization. This is the motivations and stuff that we didn't see, at least in the film of Batman v Superman. And that's, again, why there's going to be comparisons between these.
Even going further.
At most...
There was the comparison between Lex Luthor and the second hand behind the
Zemo.
That they conjured all that trouble and were able to predict to a high degree what will happen. But I borrow it in Civil Wars more than so with Lex Luthor that had no really motivations.
Yeah, Luthor was just manic to be manic and, had power and had intelligence, although he talked in fucking riddles like he was the Joker, which is some characterization that I think kind of started on Smallville, although I liked Michael Rosenbaum's version of Luthor on Smallville a lot more. But
yeah,
comparatively, Zemo had a true motivation as to why he was doing this. It's revenge, which is often the motivation for villains in things like this. And it wasn't dissimilar from what Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were doing in Age of Ultron. But he was from the same place. He was from the same kind of situation. And yes, somehow he goes from being, what we don't know what his background is other than he had a father and a wife and a son who were all killed, but he gets things kind of worked out to set all this stuff up. So I don't know a lot about Zemo, but I understand at least why he was doing what he was doing, if not how he managed to do it.
And Zemo, honestly, is one of those that, and I'm glad my pastor didn't ask me about him, because then I'm like, wait, what Zemo? I know it's Zemo, but is that
Baron Zemo is who the character would normally be.
It's the second incarnation of Baron Zemo.
Right.
With Helmet Zero or Zemo, which that is an interesting character right there to have in itself, and I would love to see more of Baron Zemo. But B, I want to get your thoughts on this. What did you think of Civil War?
I had to think a lot about Batman versus Superman because the plot had so many similarities, but it wasn't the direction. It was the story that made Batman vs Superman such a shit show. But yeah, you see, in the right hands, you can do so much when you are into it. And I believe Zack Snyder is into his thing, but not in the spirit of the original, of the source. And Feig and company clearly are. And that shows.
They really respect the characters. They respect the history. As much as people can say, well, it's not really what Civil War was, but it's so totally nails who each of the characters are.
Every new character, like Black Panther, had great scenes. They gave him exposition naturally, without hitting you with a hammer or doing flashbacks. And it was a good movie, but I still have the same issue as with some more movies. The tension at the end, you don't have to kill every time somebody, but somebody has to bite the dust, so it has more gravitas, and I still miss that.
Well, I don't even think, though, necessarily that, they had to kill someone, because, there's a lot of uncertainty left with War Machine, with James Rhodes, because, that was, oh my gosh, my heart sank in that moment, because it was a scene where you had you had a good guy and a bad guy, well, no, two good guys
guys.
fighting, and they realized, oh, these are my friends that I'm throwing a punch at.
And everything about that moment was handled perfectly because my best friend didn't really want to see this movie because he doesn't like movies about heroes fighting heroes, which is funny because anytime you have two superhero groups meet up, the first thing they do is they have to fight. Yeah. Two superheroes meet up, they have to fight first because you have to have that moment. So he wasn't excited about this movie. But part of it is you don't want to see them just unleash on each other. You don't want to see them try to hurt each other. You don't want to see them reach that viciousness. And when Falcon dodges Vision's friendly fire is what it was. It's not like Falcon thought, okay, this is going to happen so that War Machine gets shot. It was, I don't want to get shot. So he ducked and War Machine got hit. And his instinct was immediately to go and try to save Rhodey, as another person, as a friend, as an ally. It's not, okay, yeah, I could get captured, I could lose the fight, but this is my friend. And he goes to save him just as Tony's going to save him. And he lands and he knows that everything's fucked up. And he's still like, is he going to be okay? And Tony shoots him. But Tony's not even trying to kill him at that point. It's just the angry reaction. He knows he's going to recover from it.
Yeah.
But that moment of, it wasn't person against person that got Rhodey hurt. It was an accident that got that to happen. And that is, I think, very key to what this movie did, is that nobody was trying, none of the heroes were being anti-hero.
He felt responsible.
And that
Tony
happened
felt
in the
responsible.
comics.
He started the whole thing. I get that feeling from the movie. And one thing I have a minor quibble with the movie is that there are so many dicks. Like, I love the Vision in Avengers of Age of Ultron. It was the best part of that movie, and I hated him almost to the end. And then shooting War Machine was the thing that tipped it over. But Black Panthers also had an attitude that was a little bit, angry.
But then at the end, you see Panther realizes, I mean, both he and Tony are motivated by a revenge pattern, and they're following that. Tony's really hits him at the end. It's first he's doing it because he feels like it's the right thing to do, and he's trying to protect everybody. And then at the end, against Winter Soldier, that's where he wants revenge. He's so angry and he's so overpowered by emotion by that point, he can't hold it back anymore. Whereas Black Panther, who had been run over by emotion this whole point and had been equally misled, in the last second decides, I'm not going to let you, who've caused all this and who killed my father, I'm not going to let you kill yourself, because that is not a tribute to my father. That is not a tribute to my way of life. That is not the kind of person that I want to be.
As more of, with that part, is more of the a callback to the line that he gave earlier after his dad died, where he said, death is just the beginning, alluding to the fact, or to, in the comics, how T'Challa and whoever is the Black Panther can sort of call on the the previous Black Panthers for knowledge and stuff like that. So
that is part of it, but he still kind of says, it's okay that my father is dead. I don't have a problem because I understand that death is the beginning, but I wasn't ready for him to leave this life yet. That's exactly right. You can have as much philosophy about death and rebirth and reincarnation or nirvana or anything else like that you want, but you still have to deal with your personal loss in the here and now. And I don't know that anybody is quite that strong to not feel the emotional punch from that. But the motivations for him were, I think, amazing in a character that could have just been, he runs around looking like a non-cape Batman and kicks people's ass, which he did a lot of too.
Portray him as the angry black man, but he showed better conscience and control than Tony Stark and the others. So he redeemed himself. That was very important. Yes.
Yeah.
but it also showed, to tie him more back into the comics, it showed how they had been doing Black Panther for a while there, especially with, what was the event? AV, I think it was the event that led up to Secret Wars. This past event with that Jonathan Hickman did with all the incursion events, and with him fighting against Namor, and with Namor and the Atlanteans flooding Wakanda, and then so it's like, oh, they're heated rivals, but then he still was able to work with Namor because of the fact that he realized it wasn't all his fault, but at the same, but he also needed information from him. He needed stuff from him that he couldn't get from, if he's dead, sort of deal.
Yeah, but I just see it as he's biding his time until I don't need you anymore, and then I'm gonna take your head off. But we're kind of skipping over the other big introduction in this, aren't we? Well, I guess that's one, but I was going to say,
Spider-Man. May.
Yeah. You mean hot Benjamin Button Aunt May? I mean, but so with this, I will start, since Spider-Man is the first superhero I got into and all that stuff. I feel like if Marvel is dead set on, we gotta do high school Peter Parker, Tom Holland is the best choice.
Why does it sound like you're not into the idea of high school Peter Parker?
Andrew Garfield had the look, especially in the suit, of Spider-Man, but the college version of Spider-Man, of Peter Parker, and I think it's because of the fact that whenever they've cast Spider-Man before, it's been, a 27, 28-year-old person, an adult, playing a kid, essentially playing 10, 12 years younger than themselves. And it's like, just make him in college. I mean,
no, I think this is exactly the right move, because he started out as a high school student in the comics, and the beauty of it is that, because if he's in college, why is he living with his aunt still? Why is his life so revolving around being in trouble for going out at night and things? He has to hide it from somebody. If he's in college, you lose a lot of that. And it's not like he's not going to have the opportunity to get to college age in this version. I think it's far more interesting to have a high school student in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because we don't have that right
and
now.
I get that. But that's if you look at it through the eyes of, you hadn't seen Sam Raimi's Spider-Man or Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man sort of deal, where you've seen the high school Peter Parker done 2 other times.
Well, first of all, I can't tell you a goddamn thing about the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I know I watched the first one and felt like it was just ignored. The Raimi one, he was in high school, but it had nothing to do with his high school life almost at all. And that's what I'd like to see them explore in his movie. I really want them to do Peter Parker as a high school kid and what his life is like in that situation. What I'm worried about is how big of a influence is Tony going to be in Peter Parker's life now. I'm glad that they allowed him to create the webbing and the devices himself. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that that is something that they did. Having him, get an upgrade in costuming and maybe even in some of the tech is perfectly okay. But having him invented himself, I think, is key to who Peter Parker is and why Tony would really have an interest in him. Not just because he's a powerful, altered human, but because he's a science geek. And that's why their relationship makes sense. Tony Stark shows up at his house and has his in. I think that's also why he was able to pull him onto his side so easily, because Peter wants to be like Tony, and Peter wants to believe in Tony Stark. It's a hard call when someone says, "Okay, well, you have a choice. You're either going to fight on the side of Iron Man against Captain America, or you're going to fight on the side of Captain America against Iron Man." Anybody would be like, I can't make that decision. But when you're the science geek kid and Iron Man shows up in your house, that's your ideal. You know, my ideal would probably have been Cap over Tony, but I can see it from the other side in this.
I'm only saying that because I did love and do love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Because like I said, looking back on it, before Tom Holland was cast, and I had not seen or heard him at all. Mainly because he's in the Maze Runner series, or one of those young adults Hunger Game knockoff books things. And so it was like, okay, Tobey Maguire, good Peter Parker, not so good, or his Spider-Man wasn't on par with how I visioned, how I would envision Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield's almost the exact opposite. Didn't quite like him as Peter Parker, but him as Spider-Man was more understandable. This is the molding of the two. This was, because he was very quippy, which I enjoy. I enjoy my Spider-Man to have a sense of humor. He's very, with you see him doing all the visuals and stuff, or all the acrobatics and stuff like that, and it all seemed like it worked. And it's great because the kid is 19 years old right now, and I looked at him like, he sounds like he's 14. He's like, throughout the whole thing of filming, it's like, he sounds like he's freaking 14 years old playing a 14-year-old kid. But I mean, throughout the whole thing, it just seemed to work really, really well. The whole, with everything in there, just with how he behaved, because he did behave like a newer superhero. The way I looked at it, as I was thinking about this earlier this week, this was Spider-Man going from street level hero to Avengers level hero. And so it's like, you're going to have those awestruck moments of, oh my gosh, it's Iron Man. Hey, or oh my gosh, it's Captain America. Sorry, I have to punch you, but here we go.
Yeah, and nervous reaction of, I mean, what a great way to say that he talks too much when they're like, it's usually not so quippy out here on the battlefield and stuff. But if you're nervous and you're around all these technically giants to you, in one case literally, you're gonna maybe you're gonna talk a little bit more. You're gonna try to deflect using your words at the same time that you're deflecting using your webbing.
Also great use of another Disney-owned property in the scene with, hey, you guys remember the movie with the giant walker thingies? But no, so all in all, I would honestly go see Captain America Civil War again. I mean,
where is it on your list of the Marvel movies? Like, is it close to the top? Is it close to the middle? Close to the bottom?
Probably at the top, with Guardians being right behind it. And then I couldn't do too much more after that, because some of them would have to refresh my memory. But because it's like, even then, like I told my youth pastor, I'm like, all right, I think, because I'm thinking of doing either just straight through, start with Iron Man, go all the way through, or I pick out my favorites and go, okay, here, we're going to watch this one now. Now we're going to watch this one. And the next movie I told him, like, okay, the next movie, because I think you're going to like it, is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. Just because of the soundtrack alone.
Plus, you don't know a lot about the rest of the Marvel universe to enjoy it. I don't think it's that high for me as opposed to some of the other ways. I think it's probably my least favorite Captain America movie so far. And that's off of one viewing. But I don't want to imply that I didn't love it. I absolutely loved it. It was so enjoyable to watch. It was a great, fun time. People were laughing. People were cheering, clapping. We had our clapping at the end mostly for the movie in my theater. but we're degenerates out here in California. We have love
we had
for anything.
clapping too. At the end,
we probably would have laughed and clapped more if we weren't so dead inside from eating all that kale.
Well, that's just kale. That's just what kale does to you.
Yeah.
B, where does Cap America Civil War rank on your list of the Marvel movies?
And I have to say it's in the middle. It's certainly better than Age of Ultron for me, and Ant-Man was the least good one. Still good, but the least Marvel good one. And maybe, Thor 2 was below it. And on top is Avengers, and then comes Winter Soldier. It was damn good.
Yeah, I think the important thing with this though is this to me showed that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like with how we had Phase 1 and Phase 2 was led by Joss Whedon doing the Avengers movies, that Phase 3 and 4 or however long they want to go is in good hands with the Russos.
Yeah, I mean, I had no doubt about the Russos anyways.
And everyone was busting up laughing when Jim Rash came on screen. So much so,
that was
I
a
wanted to be like,
moment.
I want to go over to my pastor and go, so the Russos directed a TV show called Community. He played one of the characters called Dean Pelton, which I then told him afterwards. But
speaking of throwbacks, just because they had the Dean scene on Community that was based around the scene in Winter Soldier where they were fighting in the elevator. That scene with Bucky and Cap fighting off the German police in the stairwell was kind of like that scene for this movie. It was so good. Man, they know how to do a close-knit, closed-in room fight. The choreography on this was just
wouldn't surprise
incredible.
me if the choreographer worked on Daredevil as well, because that's what that scene reminded me of, was like just not as gritty, not as
right.
Oh, you can hear the bone break, and if you slow it down, you could see the guy wincing in actual pain. Sort of like you.
Now I kind of want to watch it in slow motion. So where things leave off, obviously we got our teasers for Spider-Man, which I don't know that it gave a lot away as for what's coming up in Spider-Man. It was just, there's Spider-Man coming.
Oh, sorry.
But Black Panther.
Sorry, real quick about Spider-Man. This is the last thing. I love the costume because it blends practical with comic perfectly. Like there's not, we don't have to worry about the organic web shooters, but even with the Amazing Spider-Man where they had mechanical, and I think there was a scene where the tip of it was peeking out, it makes sense that the whole cartridge like thing with the canister and all that stuff is outside of the costume.
Yeah, and nothing about armor or super shiny or spandex, like looking like a basketball.
It looked like it was designed to enhance his powers, like especially with how you saw with the like they explained the spider sense more as his eyes. He's able to see more in like reality, to use a scientific term. Check out Because Science, where they explain how they explain the Flash's reaction time with him being able to move as fast as he does. It was almost like that with like, okay, that's why you have the moving eyes right there. Yeah, besides also looking cool.
It looked really cool. And it gives expression on a mask that would not normally be able to have expression. That's what Ditko did when he used to draw him. That's why it was so important to be able to get that on the screen. And that's when we look back at the first Spider-Man movie by Raimi, that's what was missing when Green Goblin was on the screen, and they gave him that stupid pantomime look instead of allowing him to speak and emote and do things. That this changes everything for the character because of that. Black Panther.
I mean, that was so cool to see. I mean, because I saw on Slash Film they had the article like the 14 questions that were asked by this movie, and one of them was being, so does this mean that Bucky's gonna be in the Black Panther movie? But
right, because he conceivably could.
But I mean, honestly, with me, I see like that whole scene. So warning for people, there are 2 post-credit scenes. One is the Black Panther one, which happens like right after the cinematic credits, where they mainly say the actors and then maybe like the Russo brothers, and then the Spider-Man one comes after all the other actors, or after the main credits, the scrolling credits.
It's the last things you see.
And sorry, my mind shifted on there for a second. But the Black Panther one with the Wakanda, I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks like a really great version of Wakanda. Because at one point I've seen it in comics done where it's an African tribe, like it's all more African tribey, sort of version, and then in other versions, especially more recently, it's more I can't think of the city, but where Gorilla Grodd comes from in the comics, where they have the dome that you can't see through, that you don't see in, but they can see out, sort of deal, that hides the city.
Yeah.
And then on the outsides is all the African tribe looking areas, but it's more fake smoke screen than that's where they live.
I mean, I think it should be a mix of both, because there's no reason not to have the feeling of the tribe and everything, but they've just advanced in technology, further advanced than what most of the rest of the world has, because they're so protected, and because financially they're set up. They're the only source of vibranium, which makes you wonder how Stark Sr. got the vibranium to make Cap's shield in the first place. That's another storyline I'd like to see happen somewhere down the road. Speaking of, just real quick, Stan Lee sighting.
That's what got me sidetracked. I'm like, wait a minute, where was the Stan Lee sighting?
Tony Stank.
I loved it, because this is the other part that gave me hope in the Marvel movies, or with the Russos doing the Marvel movies. Is they still put in the humor, and they put it in great spots. Like
they know how to write their characters. Not every moment is going to be grim and dark. Bucky and Falcon sitting in the car watching as Captain America gets his first kiss in the modern era, and both like nodding approvingly. That was excellent movie overall. I really did enjoy it. I'm gonna have to watch it again to see if I like it as much as the first Avengers. And I liked Age of Ultron. I don't have the problems with it everybody else seemed to. I know that there were some faults to it and everything, but for the most part, it felt, again, I watch it for the interaction of the characters. And so this was more of a challenge because so many of the characters are fighting against each other. But I really liked the story, and just the scene on the airport tarmac essentially was just so good. But it's not what the whole movie was, and that's all I was worried about, is that it's just going to be to take us to the scene. That's not even the ultimate ending scene of the film, and where it takes us after that is, I'd argue, more important.
So how did you feel about the hinting, and I think this is where I'll leave it, but the hinting at a relationship between Scarlet Witch and Vision?
I think it makes sense because, and I think the way that they are doing it makes even more sense because of the way that they're tied through the soul gem, or the power gem. I'm sorry, that it was used to create her as she is essentially, and now it's also been used to create him and is part of his mind. And that's part of why I think what you're talking about is that he was an asshole in this. I think it's more of because he's new at life. He doesn't know how to act. He's been taking Tony's orders his entire existence, and he has these feelings for someone that he doesn't know how to deal with feelings at all. And so in all of that, he's an automaton that just became a real boy. And he's not sure how to deal with his body's going through changes. He's only had the body for a couple of weeks or whatever, so it makes sense.
He's only had it since Sokovia.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's where we're going to end. So you can contact us by leaving a voicemail at 805-328-3966, or you can email us mail@elsenerds.com. For all our subscription options and links, they can be found under the subscribe tab over at gncast.com. And you can join our Facebook page under Galactic Netcasts. And you can follow the
you can follow the show on Twitter at ElseNerds, or follow the network at Galactic Netcasts. You can also follow our producers, Beatmaster at Beatmaster80, or Evan at Mr_Fusion. Gregor is at that Gregor, and I'm at Don't Ask Comics.
And this has been a Don't Tell Glenn production. We will see you next week.
Or else.